I'm Ross Rosenberg, and I'm delighted you've come here to watch or listen. Today, I am so very fortunate and actually excited with my guest, who is a man that I kind of idolize. He is bright, very intellectual. He understands mental health concepts in a way that resonates with the person's experience of them. Plus, he wrote some books that I'm sure you're going to recognize. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. George Simon. Can I call you George, Dr. Simon? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. Could you tell our viewers and our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Well, I've been studying personality and character for about 45 years professionally,
That's a while.
doing both formal and clinical research. I had some wonderful mentors in the field. I am a student of Theodore Milan's, so I've had some very good teachers. But that's been my area of focus for, like I said, the better part of 45 years. And it wasn't really just my research into the field that helped enlighten me, I think, or at least I like to think I've been enlightened, but it was the stories that so many people told in their relationships with character disturbed people that really enlightened me and also caused me to appreciate the fact that not only was I not helping very much, but the professions, the allied mental health professions, were not helping very much when it came to either helping the relationship partners in abusive, manipulative relationships or helping the character impaired people. I got very frustrated. I thought about actually leaving the field. I thought, if I'm going to do this, I actually want to see people's lives change for the better.
Right.
I would. It's not that I need the ego boost, but I would like them to at least come in and report, "Hey, my life is better thanks to what we've been doing here. Not necessarily thanks to you, but at least thanks to what you've been doing here and the information you've given me." And that wasn't happening early on, despite all the training that I had, and I knew that something had to change. And so it turned out that something had to do with me and my perspective. And as soon as there are many ancient metaphors about this and many old sayings, but as soon as my perceptions changed, my viewpoint changed, I began to intervene differently, and that has made all the difference.
It reminds me of an overused and often inaccurate ship story, because it's been said so many times in different ways. But one of the versions is Columbus and his armada of ships were getting ready to land on, I believe it was Central America. A native saw something different out in the ocean, but he couldn't really recognize it. He just knew something was different. And he just looked and just tried to see it. And he called the shaman, the community shaman, and he looked and he looked. He meditated, and then he was able to discern thing made of metal and wood. So that whole story and the concept that you can't see what you don't understand,
Right.
it deeply impacted me in my own personal journey and my recovery. Because after a couple divorces and a lot of shame, I knew that not only could I not see what was happening, but no one else could see. We must be brothers from different mothers, because I think I think that there's so much in common in how we think. So that's why I'm super delighted for this podcast. But what you just said inspires me. It does not surprise me, because early on, when I had these ideas that would eventually become the Human Magnet Syndrome book, I was reading as many books as I could. And your book, sheep's
In sheep's clothing.
sheep's clothing, it helped me understand even more what I was going through. Tell us a little bit about the books that you wrote, if you don't mind.
Well, In Sheep's Clothing was inspired by one phenomenon, and that's the phenomenon we currently commonly call gaslighting. The term was around, but nobody was using it very frequently or commonly. What I was seeing with folks who we erroneously at the time called codependent, which is maybe something else we'll talk about later. But
what is that? Codependence. I think I heard that before, but go ahead. Yeah.
But what I was seeing was that these folks were describing this crazy making feeling that they had when their gut was telling them one thing, but they couldn't objectively verify and validate their gut hunch feelings about what it was that their toxic relationship partner was doing in the relationship. And so I adopted the strategy of seeing for myself. I said, okay, come on in, bring your partner. We'll have just a couple of evaluative sessions. And, it depends on how you come to that. I did my very best to bring in no biases.
Right.
And when I did that, I saw clearly what they were talking about, but it didn't have a label. But I saw clearly the phenomenon, this feeling of being crazy, because these tactics have that effect. Manipulative personalities know exactly what strategies to use to make you doubt and to make you want to believe that they're right and you're crazy. And when they add intensity and conviction or apparent conviction to the whole strategy, it induces even more doubt. And as soon as I saw it, as soon as my eyes were opened, I thought, you know what? There's got to be more people out there experiencing this. And that's when I started to do the research, and that's what gave birth to the book. And then I had to really work very hard to get the terms right. In my first book, I didn't even use, in my first edition, of the first book, I did not even use the term gaslighting because it wasn't even being commonly used at the time.
Yeah.
And the other thing that became evident during that research and during all the hundreds of therapy sessions that I had, was that all of the things that I was taught framework wise, and I had a very eclectic professional training.
Yes.
But all the ways that I was taught to see people and evaluate situations and diagnose the nature of problems were failing me when it came to properly understand people with what I call character disturbances. And I realized that there is a continuum, and that's what inspired my second book, that there is a continuum between what has traditionally been thought of as neurosis, and I'm going to make this ultra simple for folks. Neurosis is that phenomenon that happens when you deal with a pretty intact conscience that might be a little bit oppressive, might be a little bit too rigid, and you're not even free to just be the kind of ignorant sometimes, not necessarily evil meaning, but stumbling, bumbling kind of person with all these baser instincts and urges that you're trying to figure out how to satisfy without doing too much damage. And for the overly conscientious, this can be a really painful life journey.
Right.
And so back in the Victorian age, we had some people who were so neurotic, who were so overly conscientious, and who were so riddled with pathological levels of guilt and shame that was unnecessary, that they actually had physical symptoms that were the focus of treatment and gave birth to all of our traditional models of...
That was, Freud called that hysteria.
Right. Right.
Yes.
And those models lasted for a long time.
Yes, they did. About 1930.
But I was witnessing them fall apart even when I was in school. Do you know, in school, they were still teaching us in the classes that were primarily, like I said, I had an eclectic training, but in the classes that were still pretty much analytically oriented, they were still teaching things like autistic children were the product of cold mothers nursing.
Right.
Emotionally distant mothers who weren't, their heart wasn't in the nursing. And that's what produced autistic children. Oh my goodness.
Well, let me and to that, they were also teaching and diagnosing homosexuality as a mental health disorder,
That's
which was
exactly right.
insane.
Yeah,
So yes,
yeah.
yes, go ahead, please.
So, I mean, there were all these crazy ideas that were still persisting about why people do the things they do and what kind of problems can happen. And what I realized that at the opposite end of the spectrum are not the overly conscientious, but the not conscientious enough.
Right.
The folks whose consciences are improperly formed or are absent altogether and who do as they please, no matter who they hurt, and who lack empathy and appropriate care and concern and run roughshod over people in relationships and go through life like bulldozers and et cetera. And I thought, there's a wide spectrum out there. In our day and time, it's no longer the Victorian era. In our day and time, more relationship problems happen because people are undeveloped in their moral character, don't have enough conscientiousness, don't have enough conscience, and that's why things are falling apart. And as soon as I understood that, man.
Right. Do you mind if I just jump in on something, if you don't mind?
Sure.
I developed my relationship compatibility continuum model for the reason everyone was saying narcissist codependence. He's a narcissist. She's a codependent. Or it was not a static one size fits all. And so I'm to what you're saying and in agreement with what you're saying. I needed to understand it, but the world to understand that, yes, there is a codependent and this is the definition, but they can get healthier. And as they get healthier, they're no longer a codependent. And there is a range. And there are narcissists, or as you would say, character disordered individuals who have personality disorders. And unfortunately, those folks are unlikely to get better. But if you're not quite at that end of the continuum, you can get better. So not everyone is despicable, mean. They don't all have no empathy. So exactly. That whole idea of a continuum, it wasn't so much that I wanted to, write a book on it. It helped me sort out my own reality to figure out the problem and what seemed more resonant to the human developmental model, the psychotherapy model. We can get better, healthier. We can get less healthy. So I love your model, and I'm grateful to hear that you have done it for folks who, as you call, are is it character disturbed or character challenged?
Well, I say character disturbed because there's a difference between mild and moderate character impairments and a full-blown character disorder.
Which is personality disorder, the same, right? Are we talking about the same thing?
Well, we're talking about, I'm a stickler for terms.
I understand.
I know many personality disordered individuals who have good, solid character. My obsessive compulsive brain surgeon is as obsessive compulsive as can be. And it's a problem in his relationships.
Okay.
It is not a problem when he is doing brain surgery.
That's good. It's probably an asset.
And he has admirable character.
I understand.
So you can be even a personality disorder and not be character impaired. So I'm a stickler.
Okay.
Our words have to mean things. And this is I'm just confessing up front. It just drives me crazy when I go on the internet and I read narcissist this or narcissist that. Like every single narcissist is the same, that there's only one type and they all have this characteristic. I just want to pull my hair out because I know that the spectrum is broader than that.
Yeah, and look at me. Yeah, been pulling it out. I could go, yeah, this whole time, but I'll just go, yes, because I believe the field that most interests me is the relationships that what I call codependence, or I now term self-love deficient. And the human magnet syndrome idea, they always have a relationship with someone who has a personality disorder. So I am specific to narcissistic personality disorder, which, by the way, because of an email you sent me, I'm going to rewrite portions of my book because of what I've learned from you. So thank you for that. Oh, yeah. But it's focused on 3 personality disorders: borderline, narcissistic, and antisocial personality disorder. And they are different. beyond, you can't simplify it. They are different. So your way of thinking about things, your way of understanding things, and the way that you avoid being pigeonholed or misunderstood, I admire. So please continue.
Okay, so in character disturbance, I wanted to lay the whole spectrum out there. And I also wanted to provide the foundation for seeking the right kind of help, because what I was realizing more than anything else is that so many people came to me with reports of this is the label I use, therapy-induced trauma. And
Iatrogenic trauma.
it happened a number of ways.
Yeah.
Either the therapist was bamboozled by the very skilled impression manager, the person with the character disturbance who was so skilled at the art of positive impression management that they pulled the wool over the therapist's eyes, which made the person who's already suffering a lot of gaslighting feel even more gaslighted, and they already felt crazy enough, and now where they've come for some validation, they're thinking, oh my God, I must be crazier than even I thought. So that's one thing. The other thing that can happen is that the therapist's theoretical orientation is so out of step with what has to be done within the context of a therapy session that things will definitely get no better, and they might even get worse. And so the other part of therapy-induced trauma is where the person leaves the encounter feeling worse than when they came. Yeah. So I wanted in character disturbance to explain this is what you have to look for if you're going to even get help. And that's when I started to do workshops, because I realized that there weren't very many folks out there who got it well enough to provide the right kind of service.
Iatrogenic trauma is the trauma that you experience from the treatment you receive. The most severe cases, you go in for an amputation and they take off the wrong leg. If that happens, if you are hurt because of ignorance, because of lack of information, knowledge, or that the psychotherapist has their own mental health issues, including a character disorder, that type of trauma, especially in marriage therapy or couples therapy, can scar a codependent, traumatize a codependent, keep them from ever reaching out for help again. And that is heartbreaking trauma. I say loud and clear, if you are married to a pathological narcissist, according to my definition, do not go to marriage therapy or couples therapy. But I don't want to digress. I just wanted to just kind of jump in and say, bravo, cool, we're on that same page, and say a little bit more about it. So please continue.
And then my book with Dr. Kathy Armistead, my first co-authored book, How Did We End Up Here, was a compilation of all the research that I had done about how partners get into the mess that they're in when one person is reasonably solid in character, but they got bamboozled by somebody who is really character impaired, but good at manipulating and good at impression management. And so they only realized the mess they were in too late. So really the subtitle to How Did We End Up Here would have been probably more appropriately, and now what do I do, or where do I go from here? Now that I've finally gotten out of this mess, and now that I finally understand what happened to me, how do I make sure, or do the best I can to make sure that I don't fall into the same traps again? So that's why I wrote that book. And then my latest book, Essentials for the Journey, its subtitle is Embracing and Living what I call the 10 Commandments of Character. And I know that's kind of audacious.
I love the title, because I bet the titles are great if they're catchy and they connect to the book. And my guess is you have some really good commandments. May I call you Moses? No.
I'm not the new Moses.
We're both Jewish. It was a joke. I get it. Okay,
I'm not the new Moses, but what I realized is, and this is an amazing, that we're going to talk about something else here in just a minute. I think it's really important, related to why I use that word commandments, because we have long known this within the framework of what we call cognitive behavioral therapy. We have long known that the way we think about things, the attitudes we have, the way we see things influences heavily how we act. So if I really believe, and I'm a man in a relationship, and I think women are meant to be naturally subservient, that they're inherently inferior, blah, 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 blah. If this is the mindset that I have, I'm going to
Right.
treat my partner in a certain way. You can pretty
Right.
well count on it. But
Right.
here's the other part of the equation that most therapists don't consider.
Please
We know
tell.
that the two are intimately connected, the way we think and the way we act, but it is a lot more powerful,
Hmm.
efficacious, which is a fancy word for able to affect a more positive outcome more
Hmm.
effectively. It is a lot more, and it's actually simpler. It's a lot more powerful and efficacious to act your way into a new way of thinking than it is to think your way into a new way of acting. And most therapists make the exact same mistake that people in troubled relationships make. They waste incredible time, energy, and breath trying to convince somebody to think differently,
Right.
when all they have to do is insist that they behave
Right.
differently.
And when with the clients that I work with, codependents or SLDs, self-love deficient, the problem is their whole life, going back to their attachment trauma years in their childhood, any action or behavior was crushed. So all they have are their thoughts and their predictions of failure. And
Right.
and to what you're saying is thinking your way out. It's, what do they call, analysis by paralysis?
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. It's not going to get you
absolutely.
very far very fast. And
Right.
so that's why I brazenly called these axioms that I talk about
Mhm.
in my latest book, Essentials for the Journey, why I called them commandments. I first introduced them in my book, Character Disturbance.
Mhm.
There are certain things that if we will simply reinforce ourselves for doing, we can't do them perfectly and we can't do them reliably at first. But if we will just observe some of the time tested principles of what you call healthy self love, because self love deficits are just everywhere when it comes to getting suckered into a relationship with a
Include,
character impaired person,
oh,
right? This was the gift and insight that you were given, right?
yeah.
And why you chose,
Codependency, no more. Self-love deficit disorder. Pass it on, people.
okay, right? And so you and it looks like, as a stickler for the terms, you relabeled it more accurately as to what it really is. And there are things, there are 10 axioms that you can observe, behaviors that you can engage in and reinforce yourself for, that will change your whole outlook, that will change your whole life, that will expand your awareness and bring you to not just emotional health, but psychological health, character health, and spiritual health, all at the same time.
Explain character health, please.
Character health is when it's not just all about me and I
Mhm.
have an appropriate relationship with the universe,
Okay. It's a balance.
a
It's a
wholesome,
balance.
you know, character impaired people have toxic, abusive relationships with every, as the analysts used to call it, with every single object in
Yep.
their lives, including their substances of choice.
Right. Mhm.
They treat everything else that exists like it exists for them and for their gratification and for their exploitation.
And
That's the problem.
and it's interesting, just to do a little twist on the word object. If they treat everything like an object, including a person, well, a job object doesn't require empathy or sympathy. Now,
Exactly. So the first commandment is, through various actions, coming to appreciate the inherent interconnectedness of everything, the inherent part that you are of a much bigger something, way bigger than you, and developing some capacity to care about the impact of your very presence, let alone the nature of your actions. And that's the beginning of what I call character.